like to call this meeting to order. And Andrea, can we get roll call, please?
Yes, Chair Martinez-Beltran.
Here.
Vice Chair Meadows. Here. Director Scozola.
Here.
Tyson.
Here.
Walia. Here. Klein.
Here.
Thank you. All committee members are present.
All right, great. Do we have any public comment on matters not listed on the agenda?
None in the room and none online, Chair.
Okay, swiftly moving ahead. Then we'll go ahead and look at the consent calendar. Does anybody have changes to that? Okay, can we get a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar?
I move that we approve the minutes, March 28th, which is the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, thank you so much. Can we get roll call?
If we could ask for public comment.
Okay,
No public comment.
no public comment. Okay.
With that, I will call roll. Excuse me, I'll call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstain? That motion carries.
Thank you. And then that brings us to our regular calendar and our fierce leader, CEO update. Monica.
Fierce. All right, I just have two announcements. One, I'll start that while Andrea pulls up the next one. We've scheduled a special board meeting to kind of workshop our new space, our new headquarters. It'll be May 14th at 4 p.m. We hope that the whole entire board can join. Hopefully wish that all of us, the executive committee, can be there. It'll be at our new office space and we will be providing dinner at that as well. So there will be no other dinner for the board meeting on the 14th. And then the second item, so a few of us got to attend ribbon cutting for the Hanford project last Thursday in Hanford, California, which is down near Bakersfield. Thank you to those board members who joined us, including Chair Tyson, Vice Chair Klein, Director Walia, and Director Scozola. So the project, just to remind all folks, is we paired a clean battery with an existing natural gas peaker plant. We partnered with Middle River Power to develop this partnership or this hybrid project. The peaker plant's been there for about 20 years or so it's been in the community for a while. It runs mostly for reliability purposes. So when the grid needs electricity, it turns on and meets demand. The battery is new though, and the battery is 131 megawatt 1 hour battery. So it produces 131 megawatt hours of clean energy. It can only be charged by the grid. So it doesn't get charged by the natural gas power plant that's there. It's charged by the grid. And the theory is that it'll charge during the clean hours of the day. So the hours that the solar produces, and it'll discharge in the evening when solar doesn't produce. Over time, we expect the emissions associated with this facility, the natural gas, will reduce by about 70 to 90% because the battery will run more often than the gas peaker plant. So it's a great project for the community in terms of reducing local emissions, and it's great for the grid in terms of providing reliable and clean energy. And it's good for us because it's a way for us to meet our mandates in an affordable manner as well. So we had a couple of pictures. This is one of us actually cutting a ribbon in front of the batteries. And so, and then some of you may recognize some of the folks there, but just wanted to highlight that we were joined by U.S. Congressman Valadeo. He represents that district or that area, and was excited to have him there.
He's a tall fellow.
Yeah.
You meet
The other tall.
One of the tallest ones.
He's the one holding our logo with his finger on our logo.
Cool.
And then did we have another picture? Is that it? Yeah, and this is another picture. Oh, there we have our Chair Tyson with the congressman, and then the SVCE team and board members who attended the event. So thank you again for joining. These are exciting things for us as we grow our portfolio. I think it's just, and I think we're doing good things in Hanford too. And we talked about the Hanford Fund a little bit as well. So with that,
Representatives of both of those agencies were there too. So we got to meet them.
yes, yes, from Keene's Community Organization and
She.
Our favorite.
Self-Help Enterprises. Yes, yes, for sure.
I'm sure they were thrilled.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right, well, before we go on to the next item, I just wanted to also say about the next three items. If you all read your packet and looked at the agenda, you'll notice that it's an agenda full of what we like to call an acronym soup or alphabet soup of things. So we have demand flexibility, virtual power plants, real-time prices, time of use rate, all of it, not by design, came together in one day. And so we'll do our best to try not to be too jargony and to repeat the words and what they mean, but certainly interrupt any of staff as you need to. And so with that, we'll go on to the next item.
Okay, well, let's do it. Number 3, review opportunity and strategy for advancing demand flexibility in Silicon Valley Clean Energy's service area. Looks like we have Dawn speaking on that.
We have Dawn on the
Oh, there you
TV
are,
and
Dawn.
then Joey, if you're gonna present, come to the front, and Colton on the line as well. So we have two virtual and one in person.
Okay.
Oh, and Marin too.
2 and 2. Yeah.
2 and 2.
Are we ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
All right. Sorry I can't be with you in person there today. It looks like a full crowd. Sorry to miss. So today we're going to be talking about SVCE's emerging strategy and plans for improving demand flexibility with our customers. Can we have the next slide, please? This means further enabling our customers to better align their demand with when supply is cleanest and lowest cost. And of course, the more successful we are in doing this, the better it is for our customers, the cleaner, more affordable, and more reliable their power can be. We're going to be presenting 2 main elements here. The first, we're going to talk about the needs, the goals, and the opportunities for demand flex in our service area. And then secondly, we're going to talk about the results of a major RFP that we conducted in the second half of last year. We had a lot of responses to that. We've selected 2 vendors that we'd like to move forward with. We're in the process of contracting and negotiation right now, so that we can't speak specifically to who those players are or to the precise details that we will be sharing later. But we do want to talk generally about the scope that we're looking to contract for. We are planning to bring one of these contracts to the board at the May meeting, so in just a few weeks. And included in that scope will be a distributed energy resource management platform, a DERMS. So not letting any of you down on acronyms. We're gonna hit you early and often, but this is an important thing to understand. We'll describe what a DERMS is and how it's important to our ability to expand demand flex in our service territory. This is a complicated topic. We're looking for your guidance in terms of sort of the level at which to present this, because as I mentioned, we do want to bring it to the board in May. We have a number of us presenting. We've had a cross-functional team working on this. Demand flex by its nature is cross-functional. From our power supply team, Colton Heath, from our regulatory team, Marin Wenzel, and from our customer team, Joey Landy. So we'll be mixing and matching as we go through the topic here. Next slide, please. So over to Colton, who's going to talk about the value of demand flex from an energy and capacity standpoint.
Yeah, thank you, Don. Yeah, thank you to the committee today. So I will cover here briefly kind of the 2 value propositions that we're looking at with demand flexibility from a portfolio management perspective. So some of us are maybe familiar with the idea of the energy duck curve. This is the idea that the prices, it's the shape of the price curve in California, and you can see it here in the graph on the right. And we see highest prices consistently in the evening when the solar generation has faded away. And as a reminder, SVCE does purchase wholesale electricity in the CAISO market. So we are subject and to these prices. We're purchasing energy at all hours of the day. So as an example, this is from last week, I believe. 2 p.m. prices were around $10 a megawatt hour. And then you see in the evening around 7 p.m. solar goes away, prices pop up to almost $60 a megawatt hour. And this was a very mild day, no heat event necessarily. This is just kind of symbolic of the shape of the price curve in California for wholesale electricity. And so what Demand Flex is aiming to do is get devices in our SVCE territory to shift usage out of the peak and into those cheap solar belly hours. And so this has kind of it's got multiple benefits. One is savings opportunities for participating customers who enroll in the Demand Flex program. And then for SVCE, there's savings on wholesale energy costs. So I think, and of course, then this also aligns with SVCE's mission to make the grid cleaner, because those solar hours that devices are moving their usage into, those are going to be less carbon intensive hours, so cleaner hours there. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And then so the second value stream that we'll cover briefly is the capacity value stream. So as a load serving entity, SVCE has reliability obligations, and to meet those reliability obligations, we purchase capacity from different generators. And this is not our specific obligation curve in the graph here. This is an example from a CPUC workshop, but the black line is an example of a LSC's obligations throughout the 24 hours of a day. And you can see the message here is that still the evening peak is the highest obligation. It's the most difficult to meet that obligation to achieve compliance. And so to the extent that we can shift our obligations out of that peak, we can decrease our costs of capacity procurement to meet those reliability obligations. And we know just from, you can see kind of since 2019, capacity prices in California have really been on the rise. This is probably a story most of us are familiar with. So that makes the value of shifting these reliability obligations even greater. So I think that's a quick summary of the two value streams that we're looking at. And I'll pass it back to Dawn for kind of a history of Demand Flex and where it's going in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Colton. I think some of you have seen this slide before, but this is really looking at this Demand Flex issue historically and thinking about where we are, which is in middle of a really, really significant transition. So I'm going to talk about the past and the future as it relates to supply and demand matching. Past isn't all that long ago. Past is probably 10 years ago. 10 or 15 years ago, our grid in California was heavily fossil fuel based. The capacity was predictable. We saw seasonal price volatility, but nothing like what Colton just showed in terms of, intraday price variance. Of course, our supply picture is changing. Our grid is now at 45% plus or minus renewable and growing rapidly. We have a lot of variable capacity in terms of wind and solar, and a lot of daily price volatility, especially when we get into more extreme weather events. On the demand side, historically, we had mixed fuel buildings, meaning both gas and electricity serving a building. We were seeing electric use declining, actually flat or declining. And the devices that were in those buildings were basically powered by an on or off switch. They weren't especially smart devices. Going forward, we're seeing a really big shift in terms of demand, significant load growth projected. PG&E is talking in terms of 70% load growth between now and say 2040 or 2045. Of course, we're seeing all electric building emerge. We're seeing electrification of transportation in a big way. And a lot of these new loads are smart. They're, web connected. They can take signals over the airwaves and be dynamically controlled. So very different picture on the demand side. And, the interesting part of this is with all that load growth, there's a big need for demand flexibility like never before. If all of the new EVs plug in at once, the grid's going to have a problem. But by the same token, we have a lot of new opportunity because all these devices are smart. Next build here. On the supply and demand matching side, 10 or 15 years ago, most demand response on the system was manual, and it was mostly with big industrial customers. Utilities would call their contacts at large industrial sites, and they would literally, turn off major production processes to reduce load. That was how supply and demand matching was done. But now, of course, with all of the smart devices that we have on the system, we have the opportunity to be very precise and much broader in terms of how we do demand management. People use the expression prices to devices. So think about that tagline maybe as we go through the presentation today. Maren, I think it's over to you at this point.
Thanks, Don. So wanted to queue up a little bit of thinking about how much demand flexibility SVCE thinks we might be able to achieve, as well as what the state thinks that we ought to be aiming for. But first, just wanted to highlight that there's really 3 different buckets of demand flexibility that we generally think about. So the first one is really rate design, and both Peter and Seatlali have presentations later today on time of use and RTP rates respectively. So won't go into too much detail on that. The second bucket, which what we're calling here is daily load modification. So this is when we try to aggregate devices and get them to modify the way they dispatch every single day. And the best way to get credit for this, right, going back to the energy and capacity credit that Colton was talking about at the beginning, is through what we call a load modification process with the CEC. And so the CEC sets our RA obligation. And so essentially we go to them and we say, hey, we have these devices. Here's how we think they're going to operate. And they credit us for it. So we have a lower RA obligation. And then we sort of naturally get the energy credit through the energy markets themselves. The third bucket, which we call the event-based load reduction incentive programs, that's more the historic sort of standard demand response type resources. So as Don was saying, you could actually physically call up a big customer and ask them to turn down. There's also a number of devices that are integrated in demand response programs, but these are generally not operated every single day. They're generally used when there's periods of very high demand or grid emergency situations. So if we go to the next slide, just a couple quick examples of what these look like. As I mentioned, the rates are time of use and day ahead hourly prices. Most of our customers are on TOU rates. We have existing pilots for both TOU and real-time pricing pilots, which will get discussed more later. But our focus today in this presentation is really on the last 2 categories, the daily load modification and then the event-based demand response. So we do have a little bit of experience with the daily load mod programs. So we have an existing contract with Sunrun, where we have a solar plus storage pilot, where we are using that CEC process to get RA credit for those resources. Generally speaking, SVCE is, well, we haven't run a DR program in the past. And generally speaking, we don't put a lot of demand response in our RA portfolio itself. But we do have customers who have enrolled their devices in DR programs. So next slide. So as I mentioned, the state itself is pretty keen on demand flexibility. They think there's a big opportunity here to create value for the system by reducing the total supply side needs. And so the state put out a report, I believe earlier this year, on the 2030 goals. First of all, I'll say they estimate that there's about 3,000 megawatts of these types of resources already on the grid. The sort of event-based load reduction, that 2,000 megawatts of existing, is relatively easy to measure and sort of figure out how much capacity there is. The estimate for the rates and load mod programs are a little bit trickier, right? You can imagine you set a new rate and you see a change in behavior. It's hard to say that that was necessarily because of the rate. Maybe the person just was on vacation that week and didn't have their lights on, right? But going forward, when we get to 2030, we think that there's going to be a lot more growth in those load management and rate design programs. So we're expecting roughly 3x, or our target is for roughly 3 times as much capacity by 2030, and then roughly a doubling of the demand response programs. So if you just take SVCE's pro rata share, just take our share of the CAISO load or the state load, times those values, you'd imagine that we'd probably aim for something like 60 megawatts of the daily load mod, and roughly 75 megawatts of event-based load reduction. So if we go to the next slide, we can look quickly at just how feasible we think that might be. And so what this slide is showing is our best guess of how many different types of devices we have in our service territory today: EVs, batteries, heat pumps, as well as an estimate of how much capacity we think we can get out of those devices. And so today, we estimate we have anywhere from about 50 to about 100, a little over 100 megawatts of potential capacity in our system. That doesn't mean that all of this capacity could necessarily show up in that peak hour, right? Some people are gonna want their electric vehicles charging at that time, all of that. This is just potential capacity. And as we get to 2030, we're probably looking at more like 100 to 200 megawatts of potential capacity. So that goal of, what would that be, 135 megawatts on the last slide feels like it's very much in the realm of possibility moving forward. And with that, I think I'll pass it off to Joey, right?
Can I insert one thing just from a perspective? So if you remember, for those of us who visited Hanford last week, the battery that was installed there was 131 megawatts, 1 hour battery. So roughly the size of that project is what we're trying to target here. Anyway, go ahead, Joey.
Interesting. All right, thank you. Next slide, please. Great, so Dawn's provided an overview. Colton's given some context for the value, and Marin's provided a sense of sort of where the state is headed and where the potential is. So this is part of our game plan in getting there, but in late 2024, we issued a fairly broad solicitation. So we had a simple goal, our North Star, if you will. Thank you, Dawn. And that's to enable all customers to flex loads as much as possible and earn savings. Through doing that, they will also be contributing to a more reliable grid and generate some operational value for SVCE. We divided the solicitation into 2 distinct sections. One was for an ask for existing flexible capacity to be delivered by 2026. And the reason there was that we didn't want to launch this as a sort of pilot with untested solutions or partners. We really wanted to make sure that we had some load that we could manage right out of the gate. And the second part of the solicitation was for an additional 25 megawatts to be built out through new programs and initiatives by 2030. As luck would have it, PCE was entertaining a similar solicitation at exactly the same time. And I think that really bode well for broad interest in what we were doing. I already mentioned broad interest, but yeah, 17 proposals received. We went through multiple rounds of interviews with many different partners and have landed on what we're hoping are 2 final contracts with the front runners. Next slide, please. So this is something of an overview of where we hope we're headed. And it tells a little bit about the bids received. First and foremost, we wanted to land on solutions that covered a broad range of end-use technology types, end-use loads. One for reach for customers, but also just to maximize the amount of load that we could manage. And it's also important because there's two different distinct pathways for SVCE to accrue value from these resources. And that has to do with market rules around what fits where. But again, going back to Marin's points on traditional event-based demand response and daily load shifting, the batteries, for example, they don't really fit in the demand response context. And so we have to think about them a little bit differently. Long story short, we're entertaining these two contracts that cover smart controlled thermostats and behavioral demand response, heat pump water heaters and HVAC, battery storage, and a new commercial and industrial demand response effort. All told, that sums up to roughly 5 to 10 megawatts of demand flexibility in the near term, and building out at least an additional 15 megawatts by 2030. So putting this back, to some of the numbers that you've seen earlier, right? This doesn't solve the whole piece of, it's not the full solution by any stretch, but it does get us a good chunk of the way there if we're successful in rolling out some of these new efforts. Next slide, please. So back to our fun acronyms, the DERMS. The DERMS is really at the center of what this solicitation was for, and that's because advancing demand flexibility in this way is really predicated on three key ingredients. One, it's connecting the DERMS to devices themselves, and so that's really a software integration between the DERMS and equipment providers, so that they can speak to one another. The second is that we need to be able to deliver what we call a dispatch trigger. So some form of instruction to the device on what it's supposed to be doing based on what price signal. And those price signals could be day-ahead market prices. It could be an emergency response due to a flex alert, or even a weather forecast. So there are options, but we need to be able to deliver that to devices. And finally, we need to be able to measure what actually happened. That's sometimes dependent on the equipment type in question. Is there device level data that tells us about the load reduced or load shifted? Or do we have to measure this with interval data? But in any case, the DERMS platform is sort of one of the many sources of truth that we can have that tell us about what the results really were and how we can value that. You'll see aggregators and OEMs in this mix too. It's really just a recognition of the fact that we're not the only ones out there flexing load. There are many service providers who are as well, and we want them to be sort of part of this overall solution. We will have SVCE programs, but there may be other providers who we also want to reward and make sure they're bringing in their customers as well into the fold. All right, and last slide here, just a little bit on next steps. So again, we're still in contract negotiations, but hope to bring these forward to implementation following next month's board meeting. And in the near term, it's still very much focused on part one of our solicitation, which is existing capacity. That will be a mix of load modifying capacity from existing batteries, and hopefully a contract for some existing market integrated capacity from smart thermostats. And then we'll get into part two of this implementation phase, which is going to be an on-ramp for current SVCE programs where we've installed loads that are theoretically flexible, but not connected to anything. So we need to run integrations with DERMS provider, make sure that we stand up a new program that incentivizes and rewards customers for being part of it. We hope to kick off a new battery storage program to support new battery installations and connect those as well. new smart thermostat initiative, and I think my own personal favorite, a new C&I demand response program. Demand management is, of course, a top priority for our key account customers and is a big cost driver. And so we want to help incentivize that and reward participation in a new DR program. And ongoing in the context of all of this, we still have ongoing efforts in managed EV charging, the PG&E hourly flex pricing pilots, and our own super off-peak pilot. These are all very much related and also all very responsive to ongoing regulatory and legislative activities. So don't know exactly how it's going to shake out over time, but it's there, and we're trying to stitch it all together somewhat cohesively. I hope this was cohesive. That's it.
Okay, well, thank you for all that cohesion. I don't know that I feel as cohesive after watching them, but that's great. Thank you so much. I mean, this is amazing what you all are doing, and I have to say, and I'm just trying. I wanted to see if you would go back to that slide. There was a slide where you're talking about EV, but it's only in the long term, and I wondered why it wasn't in the short term.
That's a really good question. I'll jump in with one comment.
No slide, do you know what slide?
Oh, the slide might be
11.
11, yeah. So one thing that we've learned in the early assessments of managed EV charging is that customers are very responsive to rates. And so because this presentation is very much focused on what we're doing under the umbrella of the DERM and how we might value things managed by the DERMs as a load modifier or as event-based demand response. EVs are a little bit different in that rates are likely the best solution to reach EV owners with. Don, I don't know if you want to add any more on that, just long-term planning for EVs.
Yeah, so we have some interesting pilots going on in the EV space right now. We've had this grid share app for a few years now with EV.energy, and we have a pilot going with them where we are using a day-ahead hourly rate to see if we can further influence the timing of charging into the middle of the day. People typically come home, they plug in, and then their time of use, based app or their car, if they're using that, will start the charge at 11 p.m. in the evening when the time of use rate drops to the lowest value. We'd like to see this go further and move that charge into the middle of the day, if possible, if people are still plugged in. So that's what that pilot's about. So we really left EV charging out of this, out of the demand flex contracting work that we're doing right now, because to some extent we're already engaged with it. And also the opportunity with EV charging is not so much about reducing charging during the peak, say between 5 and 9 in the evening. As Joey mentioned, time of use rates are already doing a pretty good job of making that happen. But we see the EV opportunity as being moving demand into the sunny hours of the day. So it's a bit of a different problem problem and opportunity maybe that we're seeing with EV charging. Okay,
thank you. That's helpful. And then I just had one other question. How are you talked about 17 companies that you looked at. How are you evaluating those? Are they all, are they in different buckets? Do they cover both?
Most of them, well, that's a good question. Yeah, there were a handful that covered both categories, like existing capacity and the ability to build out. I think what the majority of them didn't have was a really broad solution that could pivot with changing opportunities, different device types. We looked at those that had a DERMS at the center as really being the top runners right out of the gate. I think that boiled us down to maybe 6 or 7. There were some really interesting solutions there, but very happy with our finalists and sort of the breadth of technology that they covered and the flexibility that they offered us in being able to pivot and manage risk over time.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Do any of my colleagues have questions? I didn't see any hands, but okay.
This is a collaboration with PCE.
The solicitation was
Okay.
TBD on how much we collaborate over time.
So just on the solicitation, and then now.
Yeah, they have slightly different programmatic priorities, although it's definitely helpful for us to be working together just to unpack some of these issues. In fact, there's some cross CCA working groups that are working on some of the same topics together, like DERMS implementation. So Don and Sanjay and I are involved with those, and Maren is involved in similar efforts more on the regulatory side. So yeah, having PCE in the mix is definitely helpful, although we'll probably implement slightly different programs.
So it'll be a different contract. It won't be a three-way contract.
Yeah.
No, it will not be a three-way contract. The contracts will be unique to PCE and to SVCE. They're going to be very similar, I think, in terms of a lot of the fine print, but the actual business elements that are included are going to be unique to the two CCAs.
Director Squizzy.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a question about the capacity prices, and I learned the V word long ago now about volatility of the market, but going from 14 to 26 and then predictably up to around $40. I'm just curious, was there any, what's the number one reason or for these dramatic price differences over the years?
Yeah, that could take a whole couple hours meeting in and of
Okay.
itself, I think.
Another time then.
Briefly, I can just say California changed its capacity program to one called Slice of Day just this year, and that, along with just kind of changing requirements, changing counting requirements, there's a lot of pieces. I'm sure Monica could chime in as well. Kind of created that market environment is what I would say.
Yeah, so we're talking about the resource adequacy market price benchmark, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something that the CPUC sets based on what they observe as the prices of the value of PG&E's portfolio like today, so that they can establish our PCIA, our power cost of difference adjuster. And so it represents kind of like all the transactions that all of the entities transacted in a 1-year period, a 12-month period, correct? And so, yes, in 2025, we saw a lot of scarcity in resource adequacy, and in 2024 as well. So I think everybody was rushing to fill.
That's the key, the
Exactly.
scarcity. Okay, that
Now
makes
we have
perfect sense.
We have a lot more capacity coming online with all these projects that we're building. So we think that the price is going to settle down over time.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
And then I had one other question. I was curious to know more about the incentives that were mentioned on one of the slides.
I think probably more to come on those, Don, in future meetings. I'm not sure.
Yeah, if we went to the last slide 13, when we talk about a bring your own device program for energy storage, for instance, there are two types of incentives that we would think about. One would be an upfront incentive to help, offset the initial cost of the installation. Another type of incentive is a pay-as-you-go, kind of a participation incentive that the customer might earn year to year for keeping their device enrolled in the program. When we do the design of that energy storage program, we'll be getting very specific about how we build those incentives. The cost of those incentives would be part of the essentially the program budget that we would have approved for that specific program. And you could do a ditto for smart thermostats. I mean, obviously different type of device, but for any program like this, we'll think about the incentive structure, what it's going to take to engage the customer and the device and keep them engaged. And this is just typically part of what any sort of agency engaging in a demand flex program or a demand response program would be doing with their customers.
Thank you very much.
Vice Chair.
Thank you. You answered the Peninsula Clean Energy question. And I'm not sure, we're not truly partnering here. Is there a bang for the buck if we actually partnered as opposed to separate? And I understand, just wondering from contract negotiation standpoint.
So yeah, interesting. The first contract that we're hoping to bring to the board in May, we're actually getting a discount because PCE is going to be contracting with them as well.
Okay, I wondered.
And a few of the vendors did that in their pitches. They say, hey, if you both work with us, we'll give you a break. But just to my earlier point, they will be separate contracts. Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that. Glad to hear that that worked out well. As far as all the meters in our area, are they all enabled for time of use at this point? Or are there any of the older meters? Because a lot of this depends upon that ability to shift and monitor.
Yeah, the vast majority of meters, and I couldn't give you a precise number, but I'll bet it's 98% plus.
Okay.
Yeah, and we still have some residential customers on a tiered rate, and it is still an option out there, but the majority of them are on time of use, and all business customers are on time of use.
Absolutely. Okay. And then lastly, can you clarify the use of battery storage and how this works from a load shift standpoint? Because from a residential battery storage standpoint specifically, most of those customers, at least from what I've seen, already have solar, are already, let's say, cognizant of time of use and how to best utilize that. How would we incentivize the use of battery storage here?
It's a really great question. I would say from the data that we've seen, it's surprising how much opportunity there is. Batteries are not necessarily optimized to the extent that you would expect. And there are a decent chunk of customers who hold a lot of capacity in reserve who could be using that as a flexible load.
I was surprised that there were 7,000 in the district.
Batteries.
Battery storage, which to me seemed high. I don't know, it just seemed like a lot. And I know that I would have guessed half that or even less.
Yeah, actually, we guessed roughly half that not that long ago, but
Okay.
that query was a more recent effort by our analytics team, and that's what we're coming up with. So
from that standpoint, is it just education or for these customers? Because my guess is it's hard to incentivize that usage because it's sitting there and I don't know how much they're using during the day and all that. And to try to get them to utilize that deep into the night increases the risk if there is a power shut off or something of that nature that they can't utilize it. And that's the only thing. It's a true battery backup kind of savings. And I'm just trying to figure out, is that reasonable to try to get that load shift? I don't know.
it's definitely reasonable.
I just want to understand, rather than them preserving it for
their
No
usage,
emergency,
which is
right.
kind of what they're just sitting.
Which is
The
why-
majority of them are just sitting on that power for emergencies, really.
Well, not all of it.
Okay.
They are using the battery as well. It's just that there's more capacity left in the battery than there needs to be. So it is additional capacity we could leverage if we have incentives available. And especially if we can accrue value from that, incentivize that behavior to dispatch those batteries for parameters that matter most to our power resources team. And we're still honing in on exactly what that strategy looks like. Now we're talking about a 2-hour time frame as being optimal.
Okay.
So if we can center dispatch across 2 hours across that fleet, that's really helpful.
And are you just trying to reduce their use, the residential usage, or actually feed the grid, which has always been a question of mine?
Yeah.
And this I don't understand enough about how the contracts are laid out or all that from a solar and battery standpoint.
I'm gonna ring a friend here, Don, you want?
Yeah, even more acronyms, right? There are a lot of solar customers out there that are on the original solar tariffs. And then we, since whenever it was, a year and a half ago, customers that have become solar customers in that time frame are on the new tariff that was it NBT net bypassable tariff. And so, yeah, the answer to that question is a little bit different. Under our Sunrun contract, we currently dispatch those batteries evenly between like 4 and 9. So they just bring the battery down to that 30% sort of minimum state of charge, and evenly dispatch into the into that peak period. And that's good for the customer because they save money on their bill, and it's good for us because we have that predictable capacity coming onto the grid. And some of it does backfeed into the grid. It's not just offsetting load.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, any other, yes, Director Holly?
So I think I may have read the answer somewhere in the presentation earlier, but a few months ago, we were talking of EV charging late in the night. And now we are saying it is better to have EV charging in the sunny daytime earlier hours, which of course, capacity wise, yes. But the argument made at that time was there is limited EV charging available in office parking lots, whereas all those cars, when they go back home, people can charge it at home and encourage them to charge it late at night. This is, in my mind, fairly different from that position. Is this because of what I read somewhere that surprisingly, a lot of people are still working from home quite a few days of the week? And tied into that isn't that pattern shifting where people are being asked to go and work in person rather than remote? I know quite a few people who did not want to work remote and have gradually been shifting to almost 4 days a week.
Yeah, I think you're right. The population that's going to be able to charge their car during the middle of the day at home is a smaller population than all EVs, by quite a bit. But how do we incentivize those customers that can to do that? The current time of use rate doesn't do it because the current time of use rate hits its lowest value at 11 p.m. or midnight, and so the charger switches on, and there you go. Using this dynamic rate, the lowest cost is during the middle of the day, and if a customer can, the app will charge that vehicle at that time instead of in the evening. Charging during the nighttime hours is still better than charging during the peak. So, that we have to think about this in stages, but the time of use rates have been quite effective in making that happen, as we've discussed. And the incremental opportunity around EV is really getting more EV charging into the daytime hours, whether that's at home or at work, like you say.
But work is limited capacity for EV charging because there are only a discrete number of charging.
There's a later presentation
Yeah.
that talks about how many people are still, working from home. And I think that.
I saw that. That's why I'm
We'll add
referring
into
to that. I'm aware of that. So I'll hold off on that, but and that's the one I mentioned,
Okay.
that I read it somewhere here. I am aware of that, George. Okay.
Okay,
Chair Mark,
does it, yes,
did I just also, I think one of the things that staff was hoping for is some direct feedback. Because we're planning on bringing this to the board in May with an actual recommendation for the 2 contracts. I know, again, it was a complicated presentation. Is there any kind of direct feedback you can provide staff as well?
Yes, ask this is sort of a question and make it to feedback. So there's a balance here between shifting to devices, electric, everything, and shifting behaviors and shifting as many behaviors as possible away from the consumer to automation, which generally means shifting to the devices. I was throughout this and I didn't see it, and it's probably difficult, but can you tell us what proportion you're looking at in between, you know, the device shift is worth this much, the behavior shift is worth this much, and the combination gets us this far? Because then what I found myself looking for, and I didn't hear, but it might be me because it's probably embedded, is what's most impactful, and are we focusing there? Because I could imagine a behavioral shift, having someone come in and do my laundry during the right hours and run my dishwasher, which I don't get gumption up till 3 p.m., which is too late. You know, how much, you know, is that shift where, and that's a sort of trivial example, but so I'm looking, because this is what you're getting at, right? Is all these shifts and what do we gain through it? So I don't know if there's a way to proportion that, because that's I'm left without really understanding that. And I don't know that it belongs here. Maybe it's really comes out of all 3 presentations we're going to hear. But where do we get the biggest bang for the buck? Is it the devices? Is it automating the behaviors? Is it changing manual behaviors?
So I was just going to say the biggest bang for the buck definitely comes from connecting to devices. But that requires a behavioral interaction, right? Someone needs to connect their device. They may need to interact with their app, you know, that controls their EV charging to say, hey, I'm working from home all next week. Charge away during the middle of the day. So there is still a behavioral aspect to a fair amount of this, and it's a great question because it's not just connect this device and never think about it again.
Right. So if you can prioritize or color code, and here's where we're getting, you know, really big numbers, and here's sort of moderate, and here's less. So I don't know. That's just how I was struggling to piece that in.
Well, one interesting anecdote might be smart thermostats, right?
Yes.
Smart thermostats, the amount of load that they can help shift is actually quite small, but so many customers have them, and it's a way into customers' homes, a way to engage with them, and that might be the way to reach the next device. So
So volume.
interesting case and bang for the buck there.
Right.
When you asked the question, I initially came back to, well, what are the ways that SVCE might accrue some value from this flexibility, the buck? And, you know, in that framing, it depends on the device, almost based on the rules of how we can value them, which Maren can probably speak better to. But, you know, what directly gives us, say, RA credit versus, you know, something that just might reshape our load that we know is valuable, but it's a little more challenging to model. So very good question, and a very complicated one.
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head. That's kind of where I was headed towards when George was saying wait for the next presentation.
Yeah.
That's fine. So thank you. Deeply appreciate that, Sally.
I just have one feedback wise, when you're saying that, along with what you're saying, I think for when you're talking with the board, at least for me, it'd be helpful to hear, you know, for example, you give the car example or you give the behavior specific example, I think will help just kind of keep the conversation and the, you know, back and forth dialogue to more of a minimum. That would be the feedback that I would have. Just illustrate it for us, and then, you know, we can kind of go from there. So, Director Connie.
Sure, and that's why I was asking, following up what Director Meadows was saying, that's why I was specifically asking about the battery storage, because that's the biggest bang for the buck, especially if we're only talking about 7,000 households, which to me is surprising to say the least, and assuming that that's only growing day by day as more people are putting in battery storage. So that's why I was around asking specifically about that. And then Monica, I'm just trying to figure out what feedback you're wanting, since we haven't talked about the specifics of either the contracts. So yes, I think everybody is saying it's a good thing to try these and start moving these forward, but I don't see what you need from us specifically.
I think everything that you've said so far makes a lot of sense. It's more about how it's complicated to think about this conceptual
Yes.
idea that what we're doing is we're changing our load through behavior and devices in order to avoid buying something.
Right.
Like it's a negative purchase in a way, right? And so that's a really in itself a kind of a complicated concept, and
Yes.
I think the examples is a really good idea on how we consider maybe talking a little bit about, the numbers that we put up there are ranges and they're just a number. We have no idea whether we'll be able to achieve them or not, right? But the contract that will be bring forward will have some actual deliverables and requirements in them. And you'll see that when you see it in the board, and so there'll be some performance requirements that they enroll a certain amount of customers in these types of programs.
Is it a two-step to the board? Is it this this
It's a
overall view?
one step.
Or is it this overview plus 2 tentative contracts or?
It'll be one contract. The second one's going to be later. So the first one, think of it that way. And it will be one that's specific to batteries. So I love the suggestion of just being more explicit with an example. We can really show the role the DERMS plays, and that the solution provider that we're working with plays in that equation. This same vendor would be supporting our CNI program that Joey described. So I think we can probably narrow the discussion a little bit around those examples for the purpose of describing what this contract is about. And maybe that'll also help just massify the conversation a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
And then the only other thing I'll say, I was thinking about yours was, I think thinking about where you focus, I'm thinking of like heating the pool, the big stuff, kind of like what I think about motherhood, like it's not gonna impede you, but it's also, you're talking about a negative purchase, right? So there's gonna be some savings. It's something that really isn't impacting me if you're heating like the pool, if you're doing the car, like it's not immediately, I think those are probably the low hanging fruit.
One quick comment.
Yes.
So I know there are 3 agenda items related to rates in some manner, and they're all interconnected. The key part to add to what you just said, Yuan, there in our service territory with 13 jurisdictions, we have a very wide range of customers, their behavior patterns and their socioeconomic situations. I know customers, and I'm not even talking the rich Los Altos Hills residents because that may be more uniform. No, seriously, in Saratoga, I see a lot more extreme. And there would be some who will be thinking individually. It doesn't matter to them $100 extra. But if they are believers of the clean energy, the climate change, there are multiple ways we need to present this and show the incentives. For some, it will be dollar, of course. For some, it will not be the dollar impact. It'll be how you are contributing and helping with the examples that you just talked about. And those are something we should keep in mind when we go about marketing some of these things.
Okay, do we have any public comment on this? We have no comments here. No. Okay, so we'll go ahead and close public comment. That was just discussion, so we'll move on to number 4, update on Silicon Valley Clean Energy ELEC pilot and recommendations for next steps. This is an action item. And Peter.
All right, I'm gonna stand up here.
Peter, how do I say your last name?
Mustache.
See, I wanted to say mustache.
Elementary school nickname.
Oh, I'm so funny. Okay.
Thanks to my colleagues. Excellent presentation and so many great questions. I feel like you've given half this presentation for me. So super easy, great setting the stage. Really appreciate that. We're going to talk about some residential rates, specifically time of use. We've kind of, like I said, set the stage really well for that. So excited to dive into this. Specifically, we'll be talking about an ELEC, a rate pilot program. The rate itself is called ELEC. I'll explain more what that means soon, so it's okay if that doesn't mean anything to you at this moment. But we'll talk about our ongoing 1.0 rate pilot that we'll be recommending that we close so that we can relaunch under a 2.0 different version of the rate pilot. And then I'll really be looking for, again, like your feedback. We'll be bringing this to the board next month. So feedback on how we present it, any questions that we could answer that we're gonna address today. And then after that, we'll do a quick informational item on a new EV rate that's still in development. Next slide, please. So just to put a finer point on it, really today we're looking for your feedback to bring to the board next month, 2 specific action items. One is to close the current ELEC 1.0 rate pilot program. We feel like we've learned enough from the program at this point that we can redesign it to better achieve our goals. And so the second item will be to adopt the new ELEC 2.0 redesigned rate pilot program. We feel like this will, again, will better achieve our original goals, which I'll get into further. Next slide, please. And to really put this in context, again, I think we've done this a lot today already, but what we're talking about 3 different kind of rate type approaches to leverage customer flexible load. And so Lolly will be talking more about real-time pricing. We just talked a lot about VPP. These are really exciting automation-based technologies, right? We still have the human element. We still have the customer. We still have the behavioral driven aspect. And no matter what, we can't really remove that, right? People are still going to put laundry in at a certain time and run their dishwasher. They're still going to plug their EV in at certain times. And so time of use rates provide a really valuable tool to provide customer behavioral driven price signals that are easier to understand and that send a clear message. So we still feel like they play an important role along with these other approaches as well. Next slide, please. So just a little background. I think a lot of us are familiar with time of use based rates, but they really, it's in its simplest form, it's different prices for energy throughout the day. So we can see here on a typical day, the blue line is the price, in this case, the generation cost, with the rate that a customer would pay throughout the day. And time of use rates originally developed with kind of one clear message, which was it's expensive during peak, don't use electricity during this time. And it was kind of like an on-off type function, like don't use at this time, use at the other times. They gotten one step more sophisticated since then. There's a hard peak kind of in between the cheaper and the more expensive time, for an hour before peak and a couple hours at night before that. But they basically, it's kind of that 3 buckets, like the off peak is the cheapest, there's the peak is most expensive, and the part peak is the in between. And we feel like that provided a role. It helped customers think about not using during the most expensive, the most grid constrained time. But as Colton talked about, the modern grid looks really different. And so here we have a dot of emissions throughout the day. And as you can see, time of use hasn't really updated to stay relevant with that, especially around this cleanest, cheapest time. And so we feel like there's a real opportunity to send not just a don't use type signal, but a use energy now type signal. And so kind of this will be framing for our rate discussion moving forward. The next slide, please. We'll be talking kind of a recap of what ELEC is, what our current rate pilot is, and the learnings that we've gotten out of it, and ultimately why we're recommending that we wrap up the current version. So what is ELEC? ELEC is a rate that PG&E offers for residential customers that can opt in, which means they can choose to be on it, but they have to have a qualifying device. So they have to have an EV or a heat pump or a standalone battery, and they have to prove to PG&E that they own that device. And then they can be on the rate. And this gray line is the time of use structure of ELEC. And we really liked this rate. It was introduced a little over 2.5 years ago. We really liked it because it was called the electric home rate. It was made specifically to lower customers' bills when they're electrifying their home. And so our board elected to do something really innovative right around 2.5 years ago, right when this rate came out, which was to launch our first rate pilot program, where the board set aside $9.5 million to play with the discount structure for 2 main goals. And the goals were to try to shift load. We've been talking a lot about that, the times, so out of peak into better times. But the bigger goal was to reduce bills from home electrification. So to do that, we set aside this money to pre-fund a discount. kind of like a customer program. We had a discount to play with so that we could offer a deeper discount for these customers, again, to try to reduce their bills when they're electrifying. And so to do that, we played with the time of use structure. And we put a bigger discount during the off-peak time. For context, all of our other residential rates are a 4% discount currently. So we did a 30% discount. And then to really send that price signal of don't use during peak, shift to the cheaper time, we actually increased peak prices above PG&E by 10%, which again was new for us at the time. In terms of enrollment, the way that we structured it kind of for simplicity was that any customer who qualified for the rate and enrolled through PG&E automatically ended up on our rate pilot program. So we just automatically did that on our side. Next slide, please. So in terms of a snapshot of where we are, we currently have over 5,300 customers enrolled on the ELEC pilot rate, and they're saving about $15 a month on average compared to what they would pay on the ELEC rate through PG&E. And we have about 85% of the budget still remaining, so over $8 million. Next slide. But we have learned some valuable lessons. We've been paying a lot of attention. We've been tracking closely every month what's happening. And it feels like we aren't quite meeting our two main goals. So in terms of reducing bill impacts from home electrification, customers are saving money. That's great, right? Customers aren't losing money, they're saving money. So we feel good about that. But 80% of customers are qualifying for the rate by owning an EV. And really this rate was designed and kind of approved by the board to try to reduce costs for installing heat pumps and electrifying your home. It's mostly EV owners who are on this rate. EV owners have access to the EV rate, which provides comparable savings without us having to supplement through additional budget. So it feels like we aren't really reaching the target audience. And in terms of load shifting, it feels like we did make a step towards improving time of use signals, but as we've been talking about today, it feels like they could be better. The rate structure could be better. It's also really hard to correlate behavior change. As Maren was saying, people use energy very differently, right? They might go on vacation one month, they might have guests in town the next month. So it's really hard to say that usage was shifted because of our rate design in particular. And the last piece, and one of the biggest ones, is that auto enrollment on our side meant that customers oftentimes weren't even aware that they're on the rate pilot. And so we had a really high hopes of engaging with them and having kind of ongoing developing conversations about how they could shift their usage and think differently about energy. But most of the time, the response was kind of like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what the rate pilot is. And so just I'm trying to catch up and inform customers. Next slide, please. So for those reasons, we're looking towards the future, and we've thought a lot about how can we redesign, how can we pivot? We feel like the concepts and the goals are still good and relevant. We feel like we could do more to get towards them. Next slide, please. So learning from some of these things, we have made some design changes to the 2.0 version. The first, to really reach the target audience of home electrification, we are proposing to require heat pump space and water heaters to qualify to be on the rate. Regardless of EV ownership or any other technology, we feel like those are really the key core technologies that we want to require to reach the right audience. I also feel like we've talked a lot about how we could improve time of use. So thinking about that midday, kind of super off-peak solar hours, cheapest time, we feel like that's a really important piece to be incorporated into the rate design. In terms of enrollment, we think that the second time around, we're proposing that we control enrollment. So customers can enroll in ELEC through PG&E. They'll land on a default rate through us that looks like any other residential rate for ELEC. They can stay on that, that's fine. But if they want to be on this rate pilot, they have to prove to us that they own heat pumps, and then we'll let them on the rate. And that controls dialogue and awareness with them from day one. They know that they're on the rate pilot. We can build from there in terms of messaging and engagement. And lastly, we feel like we can do even more with ongoing measurement and verification to really learn from this, how much load is shifted, how much does that impact our net revenue, how much does that shift some of our costs, so that we can leverage the learnings to design better residential rates for all customers that aren't subsidized as rate pilots, but that really help shift load so that we reduce costs for all customers moving forward. Next slide, please. All right, so in terms of rate design, what this would actually look like, here's kind of like 3 key elements that we're proposing to incorporate in the new design. The first part is to keep low overnight pricing. The dashed line is our discounted rate design. We keep costs low overnight because this is really key to reducing heat pump HVAC costs, especially for heating. So we feel like that part is important, but to really concentrate discount during solar hours during this new super off-peak time that we've been talking about. And then lastly, and maybe not totally intuitive at first, but we're proposing that instead of raising rates on peak in a kind of punitive way, that we have a discount at all hours, because studies have shown that low-income customers have flatter loads and they have less ability to shift load. And we want those customers to win on this rate too, right? We want to incorporate this into like our full service home upgrade program, where we fully cover the cost of electrifying a low-income household. And then we want to get as close as we can to auto enrolling them on this rate so that their bills go down. We don't have to worry about when they use and how they use. Next slide, please. Here's a little customer journey in kind of 3 different scenarios of what their experience could look like. All 3 of these customers install heat pump, space, and water heaters. Sue stays on the default ELEC rate, which again would be available to any customer. And she saves about $250 a year compared to before she installed heat pumps. We have Liz, who gets on our new ELEC 2.0 rate pilot program, makes little to no changes in how she uses energy, but she's saving $450 a month, so almost twice as much. And then lastly, we have Joe, who's a customer who's really jazzed about the pilot, who leverages all the smart tech, makes some behavior changes, and her savings are closer to $650 a year. So you can see kind of quite a big range depending on how customers interact. Next slide, please. There's a budget. Out of the remaining $8 million, we're proposing to use $3.5 million for this second rate pilot program, and then releasing the remainder to the general decarb efforts. This budget would mostly go directly towards customer discounts, lower bills, but would also cover administration. There's some billing set up especially to introduce a new time of use period. We'd have some contingency. We would want to put a lot of effort into customer communications, the Marcom side as well. Next slide. So last for this item, again, our recommendation is that the exec committee recommend to the board next month that we close the current rate pilot program and so that we can adopt this new rate pilot program. And I'll pause here before doing the EV rate informational item, just to see if there's any questions, any feedback.
Okay, Director Meadows, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So this is minor, but I don't know that you have to actually consult with the board to close ELEC 1. I mean, you can answer that. I mean, to me, it's a program, and if you choose to end it, but that's a nuance. It's not a big thing, but you don't necessarily want to ask the board things you don't need to ask them, right? So
I think my understanding is that that's generally true for a
because
program.
it's a pilot.
But because it has a rate and a
okay.
published rate schedule,
Okay.
that we got a little different procedure.
Okay.
Yeah, unless we just do something where the ELEC 2.0 rate supersedes the existing ELEC 1.0. I mean, we could do it in one action too. But I think that's
Anyway, you can, I don't want to take a lot of time with that, but you want to add on to that? Yeah.
Are you done?
No, I have a different question.
Keep going.
Okay. If I can remember it now. So when the customers on ELEC 2, when they get their rate readout, are they going to see what proportion comes from each item and action? Because that's sort of the feedback loop that might help.
Yeah, great question. And that's been a big learning from the 1.0 pilot, was that customers want and need more engagements from us. We hosted a focus, we call it a power user dinner with ELEC customers last year. And we actually had about a dozen people who were willing to come have dinner with us and just talk about their rate experience. But the biggest takeaway was that they couldn't tell if they were saving and how they were doing. And these customers were really trying. They had custom spreadsheets tracking their usage. And
Wow.
Power users.
Yeah.
And so it's really become clear, the more we deviate from PG&E, the more we need to communicate.
Mhm.
So we're talking a lot with marketing communication about how, before we even launch the new pilot, how we can make sure that we have really solid performance indicators, messaging to people about how much they're saving and why, so that we can have that embedded as we go.
Director Klein.
So let's talk about those 5,300. So some of them were auto elected into the program without us ever talking to them, correct?
They were all auto enrolled on our side. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Some of them knew about our rate pilot, and then that was the motivator for them to go to PG&E and change their rate. But some of them just changed on PG&E's side and were auto enrolled.
Okay, so my question is, there's an average of savings. Are there customers out there that, let's say, were enrolled in some way, but are paying peak rates, currently paying higher than peak rates without realizing that it's this program that's actually adding to their bill?
Yeah, good question. So we've been tracking carefully every month, and we actually categorize customers in different buckets of like, red, yellow, green, to track to make sure that customers aren't losing money. And we have seen people on a month by month, like a month here, maybe their bill went up a couple of dollars, but it's only a few percent of customers, and we track to make sure that it's not consistent. And so there's maybe been less than 5 cases where we've had to reach out to customers proactively and say, like, hey, looks like you're consistently losing money on this rate. Recommend you either change behavior or maybe switch rates.
Right, and so that was my question as far as the 5,300. I don't know what staff's plan is to immediately re-enroll them, or basically start anew and making sure that they're still committed to the program, and as well as looking at new potential additions.
I think part of the reason that we're proposing kind of them as separate items where we fully close one and then we launch a second one later when we're fully ready is that, like I said, over 80% of customers on our current rate are qualified by owning an EV. So we think only a small fraction of the 5,300 will necessarily qualify for the new pilot that we want to launch.
Okay.
We will definitely reach out to those customers who participated in the first pilot first to let them know, thanks so much for participating. You have an opportunity to be involved in a new rate pilot, but they may not all qualify.
Okay. And then lastly, is from a timing standpoint, are we planning to start the new program July 1st? Or is it transparent, or is there going to be a long delay during I'll say the most intensive portion of the year from a rate standpoint and everything else?
Yeah, good question. It's not intended to, there will be a delay in between. It's not intended to end the program during the peak rates time, certainly. And the July 1st is just kind of like the earliest that we could close the rate. Wouldn't necessarily be that we close it on July 1st. There is a notification period that we need to let customers know that a rate will be closing by sending them a letter, having a 30-day window. So we need to build that in as well.
Thank you.
When is the earliest that we can launch the 2.0? Maybe that's another way of answering it.
Yeah, I think it's up to us, but it really depends on, I think, on the implementation plan. There is a fair amount of billing set up on the billing system side, which will take several months at least. And also, I think it's really important to us as a lesson learned to have the Marcom strategy so that we have customer messaging ready to go from the beginning. And I think that's gonna take several months as well. So maybe closer to fall that we're looking at.
I just want to double click on that particular learning that Peter mentioned, because I think that was one of the fundamental things, is that we're talking about behavior change. And so in order for people to kind of follow those signals, they need to understand that they're on a different rate. And because of the way that our enrollment in rates works, it's not automatic through PG&E. And so we really want to take the time to make sure that everybody who gets on the rate knows that they're on it and what the benefits are and how to best maximize it. That necessitates taking that kind of time and resources and even figuring out sort of how we can do that.
I have a few things that'll your turn. So I wanted to just ask, so you're saying they have to come through us. Well, they didn't this time, they had to auto enroll, but I'm trying to understand going to PG&E versus coming through us.
And so PG&E controls the ELEC rate. PG&E has an ELEC rate, just like they have an EB rate and a TOUC rate, and we mirror their rates. So a customer can enroll in their PG&E portal online and choose which rate they want. They can enroll in ELEC through PG&E if they want to. And so previously, when we see a customer enrolled in ELEC for the first time through PG&E, we were automatically putting them on our rate pilot, and we didn't have a different, like a default ELEC. They were just on the pilot. So we're saying, let's change that. Let's have a default ELEC that looks like any other customer rate that we have that just mirrors PG&E's rate at a 4% discount. So when a customer, moving forward, enrolls in ELEC through PG&E, they'll end up on our default rate unless and until they, then come to us and prove enrollment to be in the new pilot program. And then we would change their rate on our side, if that makes sense.
Okay. And then I wanted to know, do we provide a summary of suggestions, for example, for this new ELEC 2? Will we say, looking at your usage, this would be a great time for you to use your heat pump. This would be a great time for you to use your, is that something we're looking to provide?
A good question. I think that we will have messaging kind of similar to just kind of the high level messaging on that rate design slide that kind of says like low overnight prices to low overnight rates to make your heat pump HVAC cheaper. But really a lot of the messaging is going to focus on daytime, the solar hours, cheapest energy, like use what you can, like in your EV, you run your dishwasher during the middle of the day when possible.
Okay.
So I think, and another thing that
I just think it would be helpful, thinking about behaviors and I'm thinking how hard this would be for you to motivate me to do some things, right? And I mean, there's some things, if you just tell me, I would be like, oh yeah, okay, well, that's great. That's easy and that's done. Yeah. So that might be a good opportunity for us to just kind of help people, see it clearly and plug in, play.
Yeah. And I think another learning from that focus group we did was like, people don't necessarily know how much energy different devices use.
Right.
And some people were like staying up late at night to run their dishwasher later or something. So I think the education part too is like, where's the bang for the buck? I think there's a lot we can do there in terms of giving people straightforward recommendations that are also impactful, like helping them put them in context.
And then my last one is just, how long was the last pilot, if it does end on July 1st? Was it a 2-year or a year?
It's been 2.5 years since January of 2023.
Okay, and so will there be the same horizon that we would look for this next one, or how, I don't remember how we did that. I mean, I was here, but I don't remember.
Yeah, I think, so the proposed budget said that we could support up to 5,000 customers through 2031, so for 5 years on the new pilot. I think that we would, kind of like we did this time, we would reevaluate and learn as we go and revisit periodically to make decisions about.
Okay, so no time frame necessarily on ELEC 2. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. That's fine, call me whatever. Two questions and a comment. The first question is, I noticed to qualify for this, you had both HVAC, a heat pump, as well as the water heater. And, I will look and I'll say, oh, this is a good time to run the HVAC, but the water heater, which I don't have yet, is a bigger unit that runs slower. Is that really a vehicle to change behavior? I don't know that it would be.
You would set a timer on it.
You would do
You
that,
wouldn't, I mean, if people.
because I
would
thought it
change
takes a
but-
long time for it to change. So that's a deliberate strategy to say, we can find a way to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and a lot of the newer tech, it is smart and sophisticated. It can sync to rate signals, and so it can charge up. It does take a couple hours, but it doesn't take, all day. It can charge a tank in a few hours during the cheapest time, so that it can coast during the more expensive
Oh,
times.
that makes sense. And my second question is, I get something in the mail every month from PG&E. It says my house and an efficient house and then a regular non-efficient house. And I'm just wondering, I look at that and I say, oh, good, I'm efficient, and then I throw it away. It's kind of like my Discover bill tells me what my credit score is. It's like, oh yeah, I don't throw it away, but I don't know what to do with that information really. And so I would just say, I don't know if there's a way to integrate with whatever PG&E does, the communications. I mean, I like to get it. It tells me I'm doing fine. But other than that, doesn't change any of my behavior. So maybe that was more of a comment than a question. It's supposed to be a question.
That's a good
My
comment.
final one is just conceptually, it looks like we hardly spent any that we budgeted. You've pared it back, you've released funds. I like that idea.
That's a good point, yeah. Anyone else with questions? Oh, sorry, Director Vaughn.
Thank you. So I like the questions that have been asked. One of the two questions essentially. One is the messaging and engagement, as you mentioned, Peter, and then Zoe added to that with the mark homework that is needed. So correct me if I'm wrong. We are going to put the electorate 1.0 to a stop at a discrete point, and then starting the electro point 2.0. And Peter, did I understand from you that not everyone will qualify because the qualifying criteria is different, and I saw that in the slide. So there are few people who are in the current who will not qualify for the second. What are we going to do about messaging to them, and what other rate that we can market to them? Have we thought about that?
Yeah, great question. So we will, in terms of messaging, we'll send them a very kind letter and say thank you so much for participating in our pilot. We really appreciate it. And in terms of what else we'll offer to them, I think our informational item after this will address that. Again, like most of those are EV owners. So we are thinking about a new EV rate that we can offer specifically to those customers. Right? Clearly, there's a lot of interest from EV owners in different kind of rate options to save them money. So if they don't qualify for the new ELEC 2.0, we're hopeful that in the near future, there will be a different kind of rate that will be attractive and available to them as well.
So then let me ask the question that I was asking the prior agenda item. The EV rates now we are suggesting to people not to charge it late at night, but to do it in the daytime hours. And I still feel not that many people are working from home. They want to, but companies are pushing people to come back and work in person. And so how robust is our data on what the expectation is going to be? And that is a high, going back to, you made some excellent points there that we need to educate the customers as to how much power is consumed for what appliance. And for EVs, we know there is high level of consumption. So for those people, just asking the question again, what are we going to do?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. I will maybe defer a little bit till we get to the
Next one, I think.
EV portion.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we have more items to.
Okay.
Okay, so a few more items on the agenda.
Sure, because they're slipping out of this one. That was the concern, that 1.0, they're not going to be part of 1.0.
Maybe you can do that next part of your presentation, 'cause
Yeah.
I think it answers a lot of questions, and then we just get through it really fast.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, we can go quickly.
Okay, so do we, oh, you're still
on the
you're
same
still
item.
going,
Yeah.
okay.
He just paused.
I'll go-
Oh, wow.
That was just a pause.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. This is short, and I asked for feedback, so I really appreciate that. This one, yeah, we can leave a little time for questions, but we'll go quickly. The gist of it is that, as we learned, there are a lot of EV owners who are interested in other rate options. So we feel like we have an opportunity here to design a rate alternative to the EV rate that's currently available that better addresses, again, this daytime time of use. And we feel like we can learn a lot by offering a new rate like this, which could inform potentially all future residential rates, because this is the grid-wide issue that's happening where TOU is out of sync with some of the cleanest, cheapest hours on the grid. Next slide, please. So really, this is just kind of a preview of a rate that's still in development, which will be coming back to you with a final version in a couple of months. But really the point of this new EV rate that we're designing is to send one clear, simple message, which is charge during the day, whenever you can, and save money, right? We have automated price signals are really exciting, but if customers don't have their vehicles plugged in during the day, then we can't do much with that, right? So I feel like TOU can play an important message here, just changing mentality around when people are plugging in. Because right now, almost everyone's charging at midnight and 1 a.m. and we really want to send a signal that people shift. So the design that we're working on really concentrates discount during those solar hours and the super off peak. But because we want to have some kind of skin in the game, we're looking at a small increase during overnight hours. So that if someone were to opt into this new rate and only charge overnight, it would lose a little bit of money, right? We don't want to give them a discount whenever they want it for making zero change. We want at least some amount of behavioral change. The next slide, please. So again, similar kind of customer journey and what this rate could look like. This is more illustrative because we're still kind of sharpening our pencil on the exact details of the new EV rate. But a customer who continues to charge only overnight will lose some money. We're looking at something like around $50 a year. It's so not a lot of money. It's enough that they are motivated to shift. And if they were unwilling or unable, say they had to go back to work, this would be an opt-in rate through us. So we could switch them back anytime. They wouldn't have to change their rate through PG&E. There wouldn't be a limit on, you changed your rate 3 months ago, you have to wait 12 months. Like they're doing it through us, we can switch them back anytime. A customer who charges, who's on the new EV rate and charges 1 out of every 4 times during the day, save a little bit of money, maybe $50 or $60 a year. But a customer who does 50 to 90% of their charging during the day would save anywhere from like $150 to over $300 a year. So these are kind of ranges that we're looking at currently. The next slide, please. And so lastly, I know we've been talking about this. We recently sent out a customer survey we got responses from over 800 customers across different rates. This was part of the ELEC 1.0 pilot, but these weren't all just ELEC customers. And one of the questions thinking about this EV rate specifically was how many customers work from home or are retired in our home during the week. And we were pretty surprised to see 2/3 of customers reported that they work from home or are retired in home. And of those customers, over half are home 4 days a week or more. And again, this could shift, but it's still a large amount of customers.
These are of the elect, no.
Not just
enrollees.
ELEC, so it's across all different rates.
This survey was from 2.5 years ago. When was this?
No, we just got results back 2
Oh,
weeks
great.
ago.
Okay.
It's very
Fantastic.
fresh. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Next slide. So in terms of the EV rate, this would basically be for all customers, whether they're renting an apartment or they own their home, whether their home is mixed fuel or all electric, as long as they're willing and able to shift. We're saying at least around 10% of their charging to daytime hours, they could break even. The only customer who wouldn't be a good fit is a solar customer. You think about the cheap daytime hours, they're consuming their solar electricity, but then they're at risk for paying a higher price overnight. So we wouldn't want their bills to go up. So just flagging that. And last slide. Just a recap on timing, we'll be taking the ELEC 1.0 and 2.0 items to the board next month. We'll continue working on the new EV rate this summer, and we're planning to bring that back to this group in August with a finalized version, and then to the board in September.
Okay, thank you. So I'll ask if there's any pressing questions. Okay, anybody who you haven't gone.
Just super quick, when it comes to the solar people, and actually this will affect you in a not so positive way, I'm assuming that that's gonna be one of those conversations that we're talking about, right? Actually talking to our customers, getting more actively involved. And for them, we take that as an opportunity to say, well, you can do this, this, and that, and then we can save money, kind of a thing. We're just opening up more conversations by that actually looking like a negative right now, but it can be a really huge positive in the end, am I right?
In terms of engagement.
Right, correct.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, great.
George Queen.
We talked about apartment renters. I don't see how EV charging really applies in that case because usually the charger itself isn't tied to the home, so how, or to the specific apartment. So is this only for single family, really?
For anyone who qualifies, so if they're in an apartment where the EV is connected and they qualify for the EV rate, then they could enroll in this rate as well. So it really depends on the structure of their charging if they have access.
The problem is, it's like, especially EVs in multifamily, it usually there's no basically rate or usage control from that standpoint.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, just bring that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so we will now move to public comment. If there is any, we'll take it. Not, we'll.
No public comments.
Okay, we'll close public comment and then we will come back for a roll call vote. I think we're ready for a vote. Are you ready for a vote? All right. So all those in favor of the update on Silicon Valley Clean Energy Elect pilot and recommendations presented for next steps?
Why don't I make a motion?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Why don't I make a motion to that effect?
Thank you. And can I get a second? Great.
Yeah.
And can we get a roll call vote?
No need for roll call, but all those in
Oh, it
favor?
says,
Aye.
yeah. Okay, and then we can move to number 5, which is recommend approval of real-time price rate. Yeah, Sitlali or who's she's on? Sitlali's on one. Okay, great. Is she presenting? Sitlali, we're ready for you.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to be presenting on a recommendation on a preliminary real-time pricing rate structure, which is actually the perfect close to our trifecta of load shifting conversation here. So one click forward, please. So the staff request is for the executive committee to recommend that the board approve a preliminary real-time pricing rate structure. And this is what's going to enable us to be compliant with California's regulatory body requirements, which I will get into. So the first thing I'll do is talk about those requirements that came out of the California Energy Commission. Then we'll talk about the real-time pricing rate structure. We'll talk about the role of the subscription, and then I'll just reiterate the staff recommendation. Next slide, please. So to get into the regulatory background and why this is a compliance item, the California Energy Commission adopted load management standards. So you might remember that we've been having a series of actions. The first was the adoption of our load management standards compliance plan, which was approved by the board last spring. Came to the board for approval of our participation in some CPUC hourly flex pricing pilots. And now we're at the dark green box here where we are needing approval from our board for a future real-time pricing rate, which would be made available to customers in 2027, so 2 years from now. And so today's ask really is a regulatory compliance action, which will allow us to meet our load management standards requirements for an RTP offering. And then we will bring an implementation recommendation to the board with final details and costs prior to 2027, because we're obviously in 2025, a lot could happen. And I'm going to talk about that in the later slides, but we're 2 years out from 2027. So what we're recommending is not an approval of a cents per kilowatt hour rate. It's really kind of like the skeletal structure of a rate that will enable real-time pricing. Next slide, please. So what is required by July 1st of 2025? It gets a little confusing when you're talking about regulatory compliance, but what's required by this summer is for us to seek approval from our board for an RTP rate. And we are allowed to seek approval of the real-time pricing rate that's offered by PG&E. One click forward, please. And so that's exactly what we're recommending we do. We're going to seek approval of what PG&E is planning on using, the structure PG&E is going to be, or is getting approval for use in 2027. Next, one click forward, please. Another click forward. Thanks. So on the left, we've got some concurrent activities, and we kind of just heard about it in the prior two presentations, but besides the ones we heard about, we also have these hourly flex pricing pilots, which we got approval for at the end of last year. They're currently operating and they'll run through 2027. And the pilots have the same model of the proposed rate structure that I'm talking about today. And we also have our ChargeWise pilot, which is an EV charging automated hourly price signal pilot. So we're learning about customer response to hourly signals right now. And so we're in a situation where we're required to seek approval from our board for an RTP rate. And that's why we're going to plan to present to bring updates to you prior to an offering in 2027. And those updates will be based on everything we learn from what we're doing in the green box and any regulatory changes that may happen between now and 2027. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about the real-time pricing rate structure, and it's really intended to better align prices with grid costs. And we heard about the demand flexibility work through Dawn's presentation, and we heard about ELEC 2.0. And all of this is about getting the right pricing signal to the customer at the right time. And so in this specific use of a real-time pricing rate structure, there will be an hourly rate. And so you're pricing at an hourly rate. And the rate structure as proposed by PG&E has three components. The first is a generation component, which is made up of two things: the cost to procure one additional megawatt hour of energy at the given hour, and the cost to procure one additional megawatt of peak capacity at that same hour. And the other components are a distribution component and a transmission component. But what we're really focused on, and really the only portion that SVCE is involved with, is the generation component, because we are a generation-only service provider. And so because of that, we'll be able to customize PG&E's rate structure. And the exact level of customization is what's going to be explored between now and anything being offered to customers in 2027. I want to highlight that this level of customization really hinges on two fundamental, very important things, which is PG&E's billing system capabilities, which are currently they're in the middle of an update, and our learnings from the real-time pricing pilots. So based on how those pilots go, what we learn will then come to you with specifics about how we plan on customizing the generation component. Next slide, please. So the last part of the rate structure is the subscription design. And the subscription is designed to protect customers. And the way it works is that a customer subscribes to their previous year's usage. And so that's the blue line in the graph here. And you, as a customer, you end up protected from any pricing, excuse me, volatility, because you're only billed the hourly real-time pricing rate at your usage above or below that blue line. And so this was designed on purpose because we don't want customers to be exposed to what could potentially be extreme volatility in any given month or day. So that's the last part of the design. And I will finish up, next slide, please, with a reiteration of what the recommendation here is, which is to have the executive committee and that the board approve this preliminary structure with the expectation that we will, of course, come to you prior to 2027 with an implementation recommendation, an update on everything we learned from the pilots, and the final customization details and costs. And all this would, well, if the executive committee recommends this to the board, then we'll be in compliance with our load management standards requirements. Any questions?
Okay, any questions? Great. So do we have public comment?
No comments.
No public comment. Okay. Well, then can we get a motion to approve the real-time price rate structure that she's presented, as well as coming back to the board with learnings?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second, and
Thank
I have a
you.
quick comment.
Sure.
We have gone through a lot of detail here, and I really want to commend every single person on the SVCE team. There is an endless amount of detail, and there are pieces that fit into each other. There's some compliance, some customer behavior, and just a whole level of detail that you have presented to us in a manner in bite-sized chunks that we can follow, and have responded beautifully to all the questions that we have been asking. And big thank you to each one.
Yeah, for sure. What she said. So, and thank you for all of this. I know you said you didn't plan it, but I think it worked well, very well. So
I guess just maybe one question to the chair of the board. Would you like this on consent or regular agenda? Do you think it's something that we should present in regular?
I'm gonna say consent. It doesn't even seem like we have any choice, right?
No.
So that would be my vote.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
If the executive committee votes for it, that is.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we've got a motion on the table, and all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, any opposed? Okay, that passes. So then we have number 6, Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board of Directors Best Practices and Operating Rules and Regulations Amendments. And that is going to be our chair.
Yeah, so I initiated this effort. If you go on to the next slide, I realize the time, I'll make it snappy, but I'll give you a chance to comment. Talking about our operating rules and regulations, you can see we've had them underway. We last update was in 2023. Next slide. So it shows you just a reflection of what sections are included. It's a certain amount of rigor to say how we do things. And then I move on to the next slide, which is my creation of context to say, frankly, I think we all agree we're a large and increasingly complex organization in every possible way. And secondly, I just want to say, I think our governance is good. I think we've done a nice job, and I think we work well with staff, and I think we make decisions in a timely fashion, and we do it with thoughtful, and I gotta commend all the board members. They're showing up prepared, and I don't take that for granted. But I have seen other CCAs have had some discussions about their governance, have had a lot of discussion with PCE and the things they've done last year. And to see, is there a time to review and tweak what we have? I'll give an example. This last election, we just discovered that our chair and vice chair aren't automatically part of the executive committee. I'll just raise this as Shouldn't we do that? I think
Yes.
so. And so I'll use that as an example. And so to come up with a plan for how can we make some tweaks and then go through an orderly process with the rest of the executive committee and the rest of the board. So the next slide is to say what the proposed scope of this ad hoc committee would be to review our operating rules and regulations, research neighboring CCA bylaws. I've already had help from Andrea to say, so, you know, how many, what's their term? How do they choose? How do they fill their committees? Some of them are quite different from us. They've got 30+ board members.
Yeah.
And so some things will apply. Identify potential amendments and then bring them to the executive committee and then the board of directors. And then the last slide that I'm going to show here is I'm recommending that we form an ad hoc committee. And I will go ahead and, as the chair's prerogative, say I've pre-selected who I think I want to be on that committee because of the size, and what I've done is try to decide who has a certain amount of governance in a large organization setting. And so I propose me. And by the way, I was the board president of a school district that had 800 employees, so it's not just the little bitty town I represent is in my background. I'm also proposing Mr. Larry Klein here, and I'm proposing Ms. Pat Showalter, all representing large organizations with a lot of elective experience. And so that would be the proposal.
Okay,
Questions?
any questions?
It
Yeah.
sounded,
Sure.
I'm very supportive of this, and it sounds like the board's gonna have, you guys are gonna have the committee meeting, and then it will be brought to the board. We're gonna have. Got it. Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure I understood the process that works.
Since we haven't formed, we haven't discussed it, but I would say this would be over the next few months.
Okay.
It's not next week, it's not next 2 years. So that's my sense of the time.
Okay. I think, does anybody have any further questions here?
I will hope that this is brought up during those meetings and brought into the executive committee for further discussion, but I definitely am very eager to, because I agree, this organization, it's great, its governance is fantastic. I love all the people I work with, so proud of this organization for so many reasons, but I want to maintain that integrity. And so what I'm hoping is, I'm sure this will be discussed, is that we can make sure that, well, I'll just say when we first sat down, this is a personal story, he told me right away, he said, it's going to take you about 2 years until you really feel like you're getting your feet on the ground and understanding all this crazy wild energy policy, you know, everything we do here. And he was so right in that, at least for me personally. You know, I just started to feel that, oh yeah, okay, I understand. So my one comment would be, I really want to hope that we can maintain what I think it has been so far, but try and prevent like usurping, you know, like, and we're in the political realm, this happens, right?
Yeah.
But I knew Girish, I believe all of us want to keep as consistent as possible the structure so that we continue maintaining this great organization, that we don't end up in those situations that are bad PR or just quite frankly don't make the organization work as well as it should. And so I think I just want to make sure we prevent brain drain, you know, that it's not just, you know, okay, it's your turn. You know, it's like just keep the qualified, very knowledgeable people as much as humanly possible. Maybe there should be some rules. I'm just talking right now, but this is for future discussion, but I think I said enough.
I agree.
Great.
I think that's great. I mean, I'm gonna cross the discussion and just for purposes of time, if that's okay with everybody, but I think this is great. I would have been somebody interested in doing this. I'm sure there are others on the board. I would just say, I think it would be great if maybe we extended it. I think it's important to have people who have a lot of experience, and I certainly agree that the three of you do. But I do think seeing some diversity in that would be a good thing and probably a positive thing for organizations. So I'll just suggest that and then see, you know, where that goes. Does anybody else have anything? I think we probably still need to take public comment, right? I think no. Okay.
No public comment?
No public comment. Great. Okay, so we'll come back and we can take a motion. And do more discussion, but we do have another thing.
I'll make a motion to allow the chair to choose his subcommittee.
I would second with the names specifically called out by the board chair.
Okay, so the motion is to form an ad hoc committee with the names that Director Chair
Yes.
Tyson.
Okay. Well, I would just say maybe if you would consider, opening it up, but I'll certainly vote for it. I'm not going to oppose that and hold it back. I think this is great and I think it's a great idea and I'm glad that you brought it forward. I think a lot of us saw, we probably were right at the crux what we needed to do.
We'll certainly have multiple opportunities for everyone to put their stamp on it.
Perfect.
May I add another comment? I also think having 3 members of the exec committee is pushing the limits of an ad hoc committee.
Yeah.
It is
That's why we
true.
chose two.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I just wanted to call it out
Yes,
in so many ways.
And I'm
Yeah.
certainly not saying that it has to.
But I understand,
just-
I
yeah.
understand.
Okay, so all those in favor?
I,
Aye. And any opposed? And that passes. Okay, so next we have number 7, program snapshot, programs portfolio tool in Salesforce. And this is only information.
And I'm sorry, Chair and Monica, I have to leave.
Oh,
I have
sure.
a council meeting and.
Sure. Okay.
So, sorry
So,
about that.
good luck with your council meeting.
Yes.
Hi, we have Newport hire map.
Hello,
And-
good afternoon, everyone.
Okay, and also Doug Bernard, it looks like.
Okay, I will keep it super short. Last month, you had an opportunity to learn, to look a little bit into our operational side of programs as you heard about the marketing work that goes into our programs. And so this month, Doug Bernard, our management analyst in our customer success department, is going to present on our new and essential data management tool that we are using to manage applications and other customer data that we get through our ever-growing portfolio of programs. So I'll pass it over to Doug.
Hi, nice to meet you all. First time I'm meeting most of you in person.
Hi, Doug.
And I'm looking forward to explaining a little bit about the how for how we do work and how we manage applications for our programs. So we can just click through.
Yeah. Wherever you're comfortable.
Yeah, that's good. You can click a couple of times. Oh, sure. Thank you. So if you think back when SVCE was very small, we had small volumes of applications, and a lot of how we reviewed applications was through stitching together different tools that were manually managed. So SurveyMonkey was how we took in applications, communicated out of Outlook. Eventually, we needed to grow a little bit bigger and export application data into Excel and review it. And then a step further was hiring vendors in order to review those applications for us and store some data in Box. But as we grew more into the thousands of applications, we outgrew all of that and we needed new software in order to help that. So over the past year, what we've been doing is implementing Salesforce and starting to use that more in the past few months in order to intake applications, review them, communicate with customers, and move them through to the payment claim process so we can actually pay out the rebates. And so this is something that SVCE staff has access to, and the programs team, vendor staff. So there's about a dozen users in here. And right now 6 programs are using this system. And we have a few key objectives. One is to improve the customer experience. I'll explain how this can help with that. Improve internal business processes so that's less manual and more automated. And then also just scale the number of customer accounts that are engaging with our programs and services. So a lot of our big programs here, home rebates, business rebates, contractor training, some of the key ones that we talk about a lot at the executive committee and board meetings. So I'll just show a few key features, recognizing time here. On the left-hand side is the website where if there's a button you click and you want to apply, it'll launch an application page on the right-hand side. Whenever you submit that form, all of that data is going to be stored in Salesforce. And then there's an admin portal where SVCE or SMUD can jump in and see what the application was, move it along. There's actions that are clearly called out for what need to be done in order to approve the application. And then you can send emails out of there as well. Here's an example of a dashboard where there's different charts you can put together. And the power of this is you can zoom in and zoom out So whenever you click on a bar or one of these numbers, it'll take you to a list of all the applicants that have been in that status. And then you can click them further to a specific application. And then, so this is a way to zoom out, but also drill into specifics if you want more information about what the applications are. A couple automations we've set up on the left-hand side is for the ELEC, which Peter just talked about. Whenever the rate code changes, we now can see that in Salesforce, and an email is automatically triggered to welcome them to the new rate and explain how you can take advantage of it. In the past, we had to manually trigger that. And so this is just improving how we work. On the right-hand side, it's hard to see here, but this is going to be how we can translate applications into other languages. We were doing that on the main website. That was hard to do with program applications just because it has to do with how we store the data. So now whenever a customer submits in Spanish or Vietnamese, it's going to hit Salesforce in English, but it'll flag that it was a multilingual customer. So that's not available yet, but we're very close to releasing that in the next few weeks. So that's going to be pretty exciting to access other customer segments that we haven't really been able to welcome into our programs, or at least all of them. And then the last slide here is just a few key lessons from the first few months of heavy usage. One is the customer experience, just mentioned, one automation we set up. There's another one that we're going to replicate that exact thing for the affordability outreach campaign. So that's talking about the ELEC I just mentioned. We're going to be able to automatically trigger some emails in order to allow customers to understand other campaigns that we have available for them. Internal business processes. This is the first time we're using Salesforce at SVCE. It's pretty significant software to implement, so it did take some time to configure. But we've set it up over the past few months in a way that we're getting a lot of value of it, and we anticipate this will continue to help us scale applicants over the coming years. And so the third piece of this is we've had over 500 applications in the past few months. And we think by adding new tools like multilingual, adding new affordability outreach, it's going to continue to scale and we'll see a lot of usage there. So thank you for staying a few minutes long, but that was the highlight.
Very good. Wow, it was so quick. You just said that there were contractor contracts included and covered in that group.
The contractor training?
Yeah, contractor training with it. Okay. And then are any of these across are they using, do we know if they're using more than 3 programs? Of all those 6 programs that you shared, or, all the programs we have, are we able to identify with that we've got somebody who's using maybe 3 of our programs, or like a super SVCE?
We could do that. We actually haven't looked at that just yet, but it's a good reminder. It's probably time to look at that because we needed to get some data in there the first 3 to 6 months in order to actually start to look at that, but it's probably time to look at that again.
Okay, yeah. And then
But we
very
could do
cool
that.
on the multilingual.
Yeah, we're really excited about that one.
Quick question. You talked about Salesforce setup, which I've heard nightmares about from some people. Do we need additional staffing specifically focused on Salesforce going forward? Does this mean that the organization needs to grow, or is it enough that once we consult through setup, we're done?
That's something we revisit every few months, and we're still in the early stages, but right now it makes sense to outsource it based on the cost. There is a scenario where maybe in a year, we think about taking one full-time hire in.
And that's the big question. It's like, okay, and there's a lot that can be pulled from this from a data standpoint, but it's the setup and then it's the ongoing updates as programs change and roll out and all that. And great to see, it's not as manual. This does simplify your staff's, all the staff's efforts, but that being said, it's also adds a component that we didn't have.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very cool.
Now I have an idea of what Salesforce does. It's like an ERP system for customer focused activities. So anyway, all right, bravo.
Okay, very good. Anybody else? Okay, so then we'll see if there's any public comment.
No public comment.
No public comment, and it's only informational, so I think that is set up. And any other committee, staff remarks, reports, announcements? Great, then we're adjourned.